It's such a big story, Dan, that I don't even know where to get into it. But maybe we might start with your own personal story about how you came to be in Uganda, and we'll get onto the subject of Uganda GAA very shortly. What are you doing over there, my friend?
Well, funny story is I am currently not in Uganda. Currently, I live in the Middle East, but I travel over and back to Uganda and to Ireland. So I've been here in Oman for 13 years. Previous to that, I was in Uganda for two, and I'm in Uganda probably between 8 to 12 weeks a year, um, working on different projects that I work within outside of the GAA as well. Um, but yeah, so originally from Kilkenny, moved to Uganda for the first time when I was 21 as part of a educational program from the University of Limerick, and I've been going back over and back for the last 15 years.
You mentioned two words there that will explain an awful lot about the growth of hurling in East Africa, right? And those two words were Kilkenny and Limerick. Can you explain a little bit about your own background? I'm assuming with that background that you're a bit of a hurler yourself, yeah?
Well, I try. I tried.
Like
It's funny.
most of us.
I haven't. I haven't actually played a competitive hurling match at home since I was 21 when I went to Uganda first. But I played a lot growing up. Played at the University of Limerick. Played underage at a couple of different levels for Kilkenny. Played football for Kilkenny. So the GA would be a huge part, and that's why for us at Equator Gaels, it's bringing the parish to the Pearl of Africa. So the idea of the parish mindset, where everything is built around communication, involvement, getting people involved, not only sport but education, and there's a group. It's actually funny. Today is the first fesh, Irish dancing fesh in Uganda with with three schools competing. So there's three Irish dancing schools as well that have kicked off in Uganda in the last 2 years.
Take me back to when you were 21, right? You go over there, you're coming fresh out of the University of Limerick. Do you work in education? You do, or is that where you
Yeah,
started
yeah,
working? Yeah.
yeah. So I'm an economics and business teacher here in Oman.
Yeah. So you arrive over there, and of course, the love of hurling, I'm sure you had to come on with you, and maybe a sliotar in the bottom of the bag and that kind of thing. Was there any GAA there when you arrived, when you rocked up there at all? Was there anybody playing any sort of games whatsoever?
No, no. Like the GAA has only really become a thing in Uganda in the last 3 years. And it has got an awful lot of coverage in the last 2 years with Uganda GAA, which is a community-based organization in Wakiso, which is just outside the capital city. There's a handball club in the north of Uganda. And now there's Equator Gaels, which is based in three schools, two in Entebbe and one in Kampala. Um, and there's very different focuses on the different schools. So the school in Kampala is in the Hands of Hope, which basically takes children out of slum areas, gives them an education, and now hurling, football, and camógie have become an integral part of their outreach initiative as well as their extracurricular activities.
These are kids who would grow up watching Kylian Mbappe. They would grow up watching, the great African footballers. Arsenal's a big thing there. Manchester United, Liverpool, Mohamed Salah being a North African is a big thing. How easy is it to put a hurl in their hand and get them to play camogie or hurling, Dan?
Well, the first thing is to try to, tell them it's not a weapon. And, se-
I don't know about that.
and secondly, what it is that they love the idea of learning something new. And what makes it so wonderful is that it's not Irish people doing this.
Hmm.
It's Ugandans coaching Ugandans to play hurling. So from watching YouTube clips to watching, the greats of my generation and past generations, and now hopefully us creating a generation of hurlers, footballers, camogie players, handballers that use the sport that we grew up with and that we love to now using it as a method of development and a method of getting them out of the hardship that they live in their personal lives, and them having something to do that gives them not only hope but gives them access. It gives them all of the things that that would be integral within any community or within any parish that we would have grown up in, that we would have seen the parish hall, the GAA pitch, and how important that was to Irish people. But now it's something that's strange, is that the village structure in Uganda is becoming like that because of children going down to I won't even call it a hurling pitch, but just at the school grounds, and you see kids pulling on Ballygunner jerseys and Dublin jerseys and Westmeath jerseys and jerseys from all over Ireland that obviously have been very kindly donated by the Irish people over the last 2 years. And really, it doesn't work unless you have those people who go out of their way and are selfless to allow what we're doing to happen.
Even in our own part of the world, you see great riches alongside great poverty, and I'm sure you've witnessed the same thing in the Middle East. How is Uganda at the moment in terms of that? How is society doing there? When you go to Kampala or somewhere like that, is it a modern city? Do they have the skyscrapers, what was once described to me as the architectural arms race of the Middle East? Is that going on there? Because the last thing I want to do is give people the impression that, this is just like a picture off the Troker box, except now they're holding a hurl kind of thing.
No. So I would say from the schools that we're working with, it's a pathway out of poverty, and it's a pathway out of have going back to the negativity on a daily basis. At least when they have education and they have sport, Gaelic games, dancing, that they have this positive outlook on life. But at the same time, like Kampala has, like any other developing city, it has its areas where you have the embassies, you have shopping malls, you have private schools, you have international schools. But then outside of that, you have the happiest people in the world, but living in the worst conditions in the world. You have a society that is built on agriculture. You have all of these things, just like in Ireland. What I would say is that the Kampala itself is in certain areas is developed, but society is like Ireland in the 40s and 50s, where everybody had food on the table coming from their own gardens. They have their own cow, they milk it, they slaughter a couple of chickens. It's that kind of thing. It's like it's two different worlds. Kampala in the center is its own little bubble where you have all of the aid agencies and that have set up. So you have huge wealth, you have five-star hotels, you have all of that. But then you draw a circle around that, and then you move outside to your slum areas, where these would have been people from rural Uganda who would have sold their land, in the hope of pastures new and green. But then they realize it's so expensive. So then they can't go back to the village because they've sold their land. Life in the capital is too expensive. And now they've set themselves up in these townships, for the lack of a better word. And these are the areas that are struggling the most because they're caught between a rock and a hard place when it comes to what they have access to.
In terms of education there, because again, it would have been historically for Irish people, we would have understood the missions, the brothers and the nuns and the priests who went to Africa for a certain period of their career. They would have taught down there, and then they would have come back and tried to inspire us as young people to go there and do the same thing. Is it the church? Is it the state? Who looks after the education for these young people? The children of the people who sold their land and moved to the city, and maybe it didn't turn out, the grass didn't turn out to be greener for them. Who takes the responsibility for their education?
So the whole thing is just a pure paradox. We always think that there's something better, there's something greater, and we always try and strive for that. But if we look at the village, a lot of villages will have, a number of primary schools. They would be religious founded. Secondary schools religious founded. But then you'll also have the state schools where the salaries are paid by the government. But most of the private schools are boarding schools, and they're run like the head teacher will often be a priest. The teachers will be paid from the school fees being paid by the children. So there is universal primary education, but a lot of people would prefer their children to go to a school where they would struggle to get the money, but it would be under the values of the church. Or in Uganda, you have a huge presence of Islam as well. So you would have schools that would be directly linked to the local mosque and the imam, etc. So you have a lot of it. A lot of the parish mentality is based around what the church would have given or what the church gives.
What's the structure of the GAA in Uganda now? Because I have this vision of you rocking up to Croke Park at Congress, and all of a sudden you have all these clubs and you have their votes, and a bit like, you know, FIFA and UEFA, what happened to them, you know, that all of a sudden these places are taking over. Is there a lot of clubs there, Dan? I know that for a fact that there's an under-13 league that gets played there amongst a couple of clubs. Is there a lot of clubs? Is there a lot of involvement? And is there any Irish involvement in these things?
So there's two clubs. Now within those clubs you have different teams. So the Wakiso Uganda GA club, they have a league, and within their CBO, which is a community-based organization, they've created a league within their club.
So it'd
Then
be
there's
kind of like the mini leagues that an Irish club would have had back home, where all the kids are part of the same club, but they play one against one another every Saturday morning. That kind of setup, like.
that, yeah, that kind of thing. So Uganda GA, community-based organization just outside Kampala. Then there's Equator Gaels, which is in Kampala, is in Entebbe, and at the end of September there will be another arm or link from Equator Gaels that is setting up in Western Uganda with the support of a family in Kilkenny.
It's amazing, you know, to see the footprint of these things or the reach that Gaelic games have. How many players would you reckon that you have across the age groups? Are there senior men's and women's teams, or is it mostly school going kids?
I would say it's under 17 and below.
Hmm.
I would say currently playing Gaelic games across the country, you're looking at probably somewhere between 150 and 200 children under the age of 17 playing.
You've obviously been involved there in Uganda GAA for a long time. How long has it taken to get to this point where there's 150, maybe 200 kids who are interested in playing? Has this been, you know, sort of your life's work just to get to this point? Or has it happened, as you mentioned, over the last 3 years where there's been a very fast development?
Well, the thing is, my role is minimal in comparison to the work that Ugandans are doing within the game itself.
Hmm.
So as I said, you have Uganda GA, which is the social media presence for the for hurling in Wakiso. So that's one club. Then you have Equator Gaels, which came from the success that Uganda GA have had at the St. Patrick's Day Festival in Uganda this year. Aidan Fogarty was out in Uganda, and they had a blitz between the teams that were created within Wakiso Gaels. And then two of the schools in Entebbe saw how much fun the children were having, how much, it brought them on leaps and bounds as individuals. And then that was the foundation of Equator Gaels. So Equator Gaels was only launched last week.
Hmm.
But the GAA or hurling in Uganda has been there for the last couple of years, but it's all been founded and coached by Ugandans. It's only through the Irish community that these clubs are being supported.
Hmm. I find the idea of Ugandans coaching other Ugandans to play hurling fascinating, right? Because these are, in inverted commas, they're our sports. We grew up playing them in a certain way, right? When you look at Ugandans playing hurling, does it look the same to you as the way it did when you were growing up in Kilkenny or when you were studying in Limerick? Or do they bring something different to the game in terms of the way they solve the problem that the game itself creates?
What I'd say is that if they have the physical attributes, they have the strength, they have the speed. But obviously, growing up, we would have been carrying a hurley to school, carrying a hurley to mass. The hurley was connected at the hip. So it's one of those things. They don't have those skill sets. But once Gaelic football kicks off in Uganda, that's when you're going to see a completely different animal altogether. They can jump high, they can run fast, they can kick far. That's where you'll actually see the attributes of Ugandans really coming to the fore. Hurling is more of a skill set. Gaelic football requires technique. It's a more strategic sport when it comes to the way in which it's played present day. Like, you have intercounty teams that are taking the rule book and almost discarding it, because now it's a professional game being played by amateurs and a professional environment that's being played by amateurs. So you have a huge strategy within Gaelic games now. It's not just the ball is being thrown in and off you go and hell for leather for 70 minutes and you have a winner at the end of it. It's so strategic. It's so technical. It's, as I said, professional. So the Ugandans with the hurling will take a little bit longer. But what you can see, for those who grasp it, some of the things you see on the training pitch is just, you're looking at them going, how are you doing this? And you've been doing it for 2 months. And then you have some of the girls have picked up camógie a lot faster than the boys have picked up hurling.
That's amazing.
Because girls are, they mature faster. So they're putting their time into making sure that they can rise the ball, that they can pass the ball. They're looking at, how can I make this thing simpler for myself, rather than what boys will do, which is, how far can I hit the ball? How hard can I hit it? How hard can I hit your man a shoulder? Whereas the girls are thinking about the intricacies of, okay, ball in my hand is the most important thing. How do I get it there as fast as I can? Whereas the boys, sometimes you think that it was a scene from Braveheart going on. They're all running in one direction, and the ball, and then the ball breaks out, and because in the younger age groups, the girls and the boys will play together. But obviously, as the boys get older and the girls get older, the boys get stronger. So then obviously we separate them into hurling and into camógie. But the girls are picking it up equally as fast, or if not faster, the skill set of the games.
It's amazing to see, because, as I say, all these games are problems of time and space to be solved, and the girls showing this innate intelligence of, okay, getting the ball into my hand and keeping it there and not having to work to get it back, whereas, as you say, the lads are going, oh Jesus, let me see how far I can hit this, kind of thing. you mentioned the growth of football there, Dan, right? What does it do to your soul as a Kilkenny man to see football being relatively easy when compared to hurling and camógie to teach? Because it is the case that, again, I always say that, hurling is an art, but football is for the artisan. So if you can be like Michael Darren McCauley or myself and just a hard worker, you'll go a certain distance, but it's harder to do that in hurling. Does that upset you in any way?
Well, it just, as you said, it's an art. It's an art form, and that's why, if you look at the football game versus the hurling game, there's a lot more counties, obviously Kilkenny not being one of them, but there's a lot more counties that play football competitively. And I don't mean competitively in the sense of, it's played everywhere, but you have a greater scope for football. It's like, if you were to look at the international clubs around the world, the majority of them are Gaelic football clubs, just like the one I'm part of here in Oman. Like, we have a football club here. We don't have a hurling club because there's not enough Irish people here in Oman to play hurling. Whereas with Gaelic football, we have Australians, we have South Africans, we have Omanis themselves. So our football team has 7, 8, 9 nationalities. Whereas if you're to have a hurling team, you probably need to have at least over half of it be Irish, but then the other half be at least, English, Scottish, or Welsh, who have an Irish parent and they might have grown up with it and they know what it is, or they might have played it at home in Ireland during the summer. But it's very, very different. It's very different. And the reason why football is something that Ugandans are very, very good at is the fact that the sports they would have grown up playing would have been soccer, football, netball, basketball. So they have the eye-hand coordination. They understand the flight of the ball. They understand how to catch it, how to pass it. They've already have the skill set, but it's just using those skills in a different manner.
Yeah.
Whereas hurling is something completely different.
Mm.
Like, there might be lads at home in Ireland, during the winter swinging the handle of a hatchet to try and, strengthen their strike or whatever. So the Ugandans would never have had any kind of background of what Gaelic game, what hurling is. They know what football is, but it's in a different form because of the other sports that they play. They can adapt to that.
And yet, Dan, there was one night, I live in Stockholm in Sweden, right? And there was one night that I had a bag of hurls in the back of the car, and I happened to be at a football training, and I opened the boot of the car to take the football kit out, and I said, geez, I'll bring the hurls anyway. And I handed them out and said, right, this is how you do this. And I remember a Kurdish lad called Hassoni Faili, and he picked up the ball, he picked up the sliotar, and he picked up the hurl, and he hit it as if he'd been doing it all his life, right? So I sometimes wonder, are we doing people a disservice by saying, like, you need the right passport to play this game? Because it would appear from your experience in Uganda, and maybe to a lesser extent in Oman, that people can actually find a way to play these games, like the Gaels who are learning camógie now. Are we a little bit too hard on them? Do we not believe in them enough in a way, do you think?
I think it comes with a slight little bit of arrogance and ego that it's ours, as you said at the beginning, like that it's our sport, and we almost don't want them to be good at it or better than us. But I don't think we're doing them a disservice. It's just something that hasn't been part of their upbringing. But it's not something that they can't learn.
Yeah.
It's just a lot more difficult for them to learn how to play hurling and camógie than it is for them to be able to play football or handball.
How are Gaelic games funded in Uganda? Because in Sweden and in the Middle East, and obviously in Ireland, in the UK, and America, there are companies who are working there. They're more than happy to put their money behind it. I was at a tournament there a couple of weeks ago in Gävle, 2 hours north of Stockholm, and a huge amount of money was paid by sponsors to host that. You're not in a country where the sport has a huge profile. So how are these things funded? How do you get money for slitters and helmets? Because I've seen everybody has the kit when I look at the videos on Instagram.
Irish people being very, very generous, whether it be Irish people traveling to Uganda, whether it be families of people who work in Uganda, people who've been in Uganda and just came across the fact that there's hurling and football being played there. The Irish community and the Irish society itself, the Irish embassy, the Irish ambassador is a huge advocate of Gaelic games in Uganda. So it's really sport being run by Ugandans, but being supported by the Irish and the Irish community around the world.
Who are the Irish in Uganda? How many Irish people will be living there? Are they like yourself? Are they working in education, or is there other stuff that they're doing there? Are they in construction? Are they in tech? That kind of thing?
Sure, the same as anything. You find an Irishman doing absolutely like one of the main supporters in Entebbe is the owner of Paddy Uganda's, which is the Irish bar. We have a couple of travel agents who are Irish who used to work with bigger airlines who've set up in Uganda. There's a couple of the managing directors of hotels that are Irish that support. So in general, it's Irish people who understand the importance of the GAA in society or in a community. And if they're not living in Ireland, what better way of doing it, of helping people who are less fortunate have the opportunity and to benefit from what Irish people do, benefit from Gaelic games in the community and what it gives to Irish people. Like if it gives you a sense of belonging, it gives you a sense that you're part of a team, but it also gives you the opportunity to improve yourself because, it's not, a team isn't just 15 people, it's 15 individuals working together. So it's one of those things that Irish people, when they go abroad, it's very, very important for them, even though they might not be directly linked to it or directly involved, but that they are part of it, that they can take everything that's Irish within them and also support Ugandans who are actually epitomizing what it is to be Irish.
If you look at the countries around Uganda in East Africa now, what's the potential? Because where you are in the Middle East, I know there's these tournaments that take place in Dubai and Abu Dhabi and in Oman. Yeah. Everybody gets together, very well funded. The Asian Games is one of the biggest tournaments in the world, right? Forget anything that happens in Ireland. Teams come from all over there. In Europe, we get together in places like Maastricht and Dresden, and we get together and we hurl. What are the possibilities there in Africa? Because we are dealing with a situation where maybe the members of your clubs there wouldn't have the money to fly and stay in a hotel and play a one-day blitz and that kind of thing. Is there a potential there for a domestic league in Uganda or for a local continental league there that might be part of the future?
Well, there definitely is. Like, there's huge growth, and there is, there are other, sporting organizations that have seen what, Uganda GA and now Equator Gaels, what they've been able to do in such a short period of time. They're looking at how can they work with, the coaches within the hurling club and within football. How can they, not replicate it, but how can they do these things without? And then for us as Irish people, it's important that the sport remains and or keeps its value as a sport, that it doesn't just become, a way of, like you said earlier, that it's not supposed to be a charity. It's not a charitable thing.
Mm.
Like, it's not, like you said, a kid on the front of a troker box. Like, it's not a large organization which has people to be paid and this and that. The coaches are coaches uh, within the school, so they're working as teachers. Yes, it the clubs do try and give them something for their transport or for their phones or whatever, just to allow them, or not to be taking away from their own personal earnings for what they do. But at the same time, it's so important that it grows organically rather than it just being, oh, let's open another one. Oh, let's open another one. Then all of a sudden, Daniel Reid's attached to 65 clubs around the world, and all of a sudden I'm running for president of the GAA. So,
Great vote
like,
for you.
thanks. But you know what I mean? It's supposed to be something that happens over time because it's supposed to happen, not because we want it to happen.
Yeah. I always said that this idea of the single point of failure, right? I was chairman of our club here and we set it up for about 10 or 12 years, and I shouldn't have been, because this is not me. It's not my club. It's not about me. It has to be about the club and the sport and what they create in the community. And the same thing for yourself, both in the Middle East and in Africa. And what have you found the attitude of Croke Park to be, right? Because if we go back to maybe 2008, 2009, when I was getting involved in the GAA abroad, I always found the GEA to sort of look at us, at that time, pretty much as something they scraped off their shoe. It's gotten better now. You have the World Games that took place in Derry there recently. It's a much bigger, much better organized thing. How do you find, do they treat you well? Do they treat you as equals? Do they treat you as an irritant? How do you find Croke Park when you contact them, Dan, looking for help?
Well, to be fair, the last couple of weeks we've been in communication with HQ, with the GAA itself, and we're getting there. It just takes time because it's not in Ireland. That's the first thing. Second, you have to look at the bureaucracy of setting up, firstly, a CBO, which is a community-based organization, then creating a hurling club within the GAA, and then to be recognised internationally as being a GAA licensed and supported organisation outside of Ireland. So it's not a click your fingers kind of job. But to be fair, with the interactions I've had so far, it's been very, very positive.
In terms of the future and that kind of thing, because as you mentioned, organic growth there being the big thing. You mentioned Uganda GEA as being the sort of the community-based organization that is sort of structuring this. Sometimes we kind of have to say, right, we have to be a little bit harsh and say, well, you need to have a club. You have to register your players. You have to have qualified referees and that kind of thing. How is the region approaching that? Do you know? Is there plans in place to educate referees, to put on coaching seminars for the Ugandans who are teaching the game now? Or because, I mean, YouTube is absolutely brilliant, but sometimes it can help to have a TJ Reid or somebody come down and explain some of the concepts to you,
No, but that's the thing. So just going back, just because I just don't want people to get confused with like the club and Uganda GA thing. So the Uganda GA was the first founded hurling club in Uganda,
Mm.
and it's sometimes when people are called it's like GA in Uganda and Uganda GA. Uganda GA is a club like ours,
It's, in fairness,
and
it's very cheeky of them to take the name of a whole country and name the club after that, but we let that go.
no, no, but it comes up in conversation an awful
Mm.
lot easier than anything else.
Yeah.
So what I would say with the growth, the idea is that over the next 6 months that we would start putting the coaches on coaching courses, because there are coaching courses that are available online. But then over the next while, we're seeing that there's more and more inter-county players, and that are gravitating towards getting involved and becoming ambassadors to our clubs. And because let's be honest, it's good for their profile as well as it's good for our profile if they get involved with a outreach initiative in Uganda, coaching hurling, football, camógie. It's as good for them as it is for us. And to be honest, I'm more than willing for them to not use us, but to get that exposure and get that experience. Because if you're going to teach or going to coach a group of players who've never played the game before, it's going to be an awful lot easier when you go back home to coach people. It's the same as me as a teacher. When I was working in Uganda as a teacher, it was very difficult because I had 120 children in one classroom. Whereas now I have a classroom of 28 to 30. So sometimes the best experience you get is a difficult experience, because then it makes what you're doing in your day-to-day life make more sense and give it more purpose, because you understand the difficulties that can be put in front of you as a coach, as a teacher, as a mentor in general. So I do think, over, as you said, the GAA will grow in East Africa. So you have the group from Ireland, the GAA players who travelled to Kenya last year, and they're travelling again this year. Last year they planted over 1 million trees, and they'll play an exhibition game in Kenya. So obviously, what will happen is there will be some Ugandan or some Kenyan man or woman who will say, why don't we do this more here? Why don't we set up more clubs here? And then if you have more clubs in Kenya and you have the growth that is being experienced in Uganda right now, eventually it'll come to a point where we'll get sponsorship, and we'll bring we'll almost call it a county team, where we'll pick the best players in Uganda to play the best players from Kenya, we'll say, if we'll call it an East African county board, where you'd have a team, a full team, like they do with the World Games, where you pick the best players from the Middle East, the best players from Australasia, best players from America, and they play against each other. That's something I could see in the future, is with the creation of a Middle Eastern or a East African county board, and then having clubs or county teams, which would be, the Ugandan cranes versus the Kenyan elephants or whatever. That's something that I could see happening in a not too distant future.
Yeah, we're already at a stage with European GAA, or Gaelic Games Europe as it's known, where the team that wins the European Championship goes into the Leinster Junior Football and Leinster Junior Hurling Championships, as far as I know, And now it hasn't been easy, because we don't play 11 aside, we don't play 15 aside. We play 11 in football and sometimes 9 to 11 in hurling and camógie and that, so it can be difficult. One of the things I thought about, Dan, right, and this is from the Instagram videos and the YouTube videos that I was watching, the pitches wouldn't be great, right? So access to facilities can be very difficult. Maastricht is the only full-size 15-a-side pitch in Europe. Are there soccer pitches that you could be playing on that you just can't get access to? Or is it just very difficult in general to find sporting facilities? Because there wouldn't be much ground hurling in Kampala now, from what I've seen,
Oh, no, it wouldn't. No, ground hurling is non-existent. Keep it in the hand. Keep it off the floor. But in general, I would say, when it comes to facilities, I would say watch this space, without saying too much. But yeah, I would say that the surfaces could be better. Access is difficult, but it is our primary focus at the minute, is getting a facility that would allow us to have better surfaces for the children to play on. Because as well as that, some of them are not even wearing boots. So, having a decent surface is priority, to make sure that there's no injuries, getting more football boots out, to protect the children. And even when, as you were saying earlier, with regards to coaching, vetting the coaches, making sure that it's basically what we're trying to do things the way they should be. Like, the coaches should be vetted. They should be trained. They should have, some form of some level of coaching experience or coaching qualifications. The idea is trying to, with the support of the Ugandan community, as well as those who have created and set up these clubs, is getting everything run like it should be, so that it is an authentic thing outside of Ireland, that it is going to be respected and looked at positively from outside of Uganda. That people see that the impact that it has, the fact that some of the children now are being sponsored because they're hurling, so they have the opportunity to go to school. In the Hands for Hope in Kampala, where the children come out of the townships, like all those children are being sponsored by people outside of Uganda, so that they can go to school. And now they're playing hurling. They're competing in the Fesh today in Uganda, where there's going to be up to 80 students Irish dancing for a Fesh title. So an Irish dancing title. So like if you take hurling, football, camógie, handball, Irish dancing, but the important thing is as well, it's not just Irish dancing, it's Irish fusion dancing, which is a mix with the cultural dance that is so important to the cultural upbringing of Ugandans. So it's not like, somebody said to me the other day, what you're doing, do you feel like it's a little bit imperialist? I'm like, no, it's empowerist. It's not supposed to be us forcing our games on them. They're the ones who've come up with the idea of creating hurling and football clubs, and they're the ones running it, and they're the ones who are training. All we're doing is standing on the sidelines, shouting in like Irish mammies on a Saturday morning. So that's the important thing.
Yeah. I think if you look in the Brittany region of France and in parts of Spain as well, that they have, their own French speaking referees, they have their own competitions, they run themselves, they pay very little attention to anything that happens in Croke Park, and they just get on with it. One final question for you, Dan, and thank you so much for taking the time. It's been fascinating to talk to you. What do the Ugandans coaching hurling and playing hurling and camógie and Gaelic football, how do they see Irish people? How do they see these games? Because for us, it means one thing. For you as a Kilkenny man taking a hurl in your hand, it means one thing. For me as a Dublin man, when somebody hands me a hurl or a football, it means something completely different. What does it mean to them? What does Irish culture and Irishness mean to them?
To be honest, when it comes to Irish, and this is something you alluded to earlier, the Irish in the past would have been your missionaries. So it would have been the Mill Hill Fathers, it would have been the Irish congregations of nuns, little Sisters of St. Francis. They would have been core. So Ugandans know Irish people from the development that they did at the turn of the 20th century, from around 1880 up to 1960. So that would have been their understanding of Irish people, the saints and the scholar, that kind of thing. So they understand that within Irish people there is this developmental idea that if we have, why don't we give? So this is what they understand. They understand Irish people from the perspective of what the priests and the nuns did for development there. So they understand where we're coming from when we're involved. So obviously there is a certain amount of how can you help us? How can you help us? Help us, help us, help us. But what we found is because they've created it themselves, they see us as being supporters of it. Like everything that they do is supported by us, and anything that we do is supported by them. So it's everything that we do for now is running parallel. Like we haven't had any conflict, we haven't had any issues, with Ugandans and the Ugandans involved, and everything is developmental. Like the event today that has been run by the Irish dancing schools, like that's going to bring Ugandans together. It's going to bring the Irish community together. It's going to bring together people from outside the Irish community who are just interested in the Irishness. Because obviously it's something you're in Sweden, the Irish pub is the center of activities in so many cities around the world. There's an Irish pub on Mount Everest. So like it's one of those things where Irishness is something to be part of. It's not just ours. You can associate yourself with being involved in Irish sport, Irish culture without being Irish. So that's what I think it's so important. And that's what Ugandans have really, really kind of integrated into their lives, is that being from Ireland is one thing, but being Irish is something completely different. It's a mindset, not a passport or a degree or a hurling club. It's more than just that. Being Irish, being Ugandan, being Omani is beyond where you're from.
And my very final question to you, if I do come down to Uganda with me camógies and me hurlers, can I expect to see you pulling on a helmet there? Will I see you between the sticks or somewhere in the midfield there at any time in the near future, Dan?
I would say yes. And you
Big
know
time.
what? Yeah, put a hurley in my hand after 15 years, and I'll tell you, I talked about it being a weapon earlier, and that would be seen.
But it never leaves you. Once you learn these things, they never leave you, really, though, do they?
Nah, not. It's like riding a bicycle. If you poke a ball across the field at me, I'll take it down on the hurley like it was 1995.
No bother to you. Well, listen, I hope I get that opportunity, and I hope that I do get it on a field somewhere in Uganda. Dan, thanks so much for talking to me.
No bother at all.